I call to order this regular session of the City of Bloomington Common Council. Madam Clerk, I invite you to call the roll.
Councilmember Flaherty. Here. Rosenbarger. Here. Sims. Here. Piedmont Smith. Here. Scambalori. Here. Rollo.
Here.
Sandberg.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
And Volin.
Here.
Thank you.
Let's continue with our land and labor acknowledgement. Vice President Piedmont Smith.
We recognize that the City of Bloomington sits on native land. The city, as well as city administrative buildings, are on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people. And we acknowledge they are past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We also acknowledge that much of the economic progress and development in Indiana and in Bloomington resulted from the unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, specifically enslaved African labor. We acknowledge that this land remains home to and a site of gathering and healing for many indigenous and other people of color, and we commit to the work necessary to create and promote a more equitable and just Bloomington. We move forward knowing and acknowledging our rich, complicated, and sometimes painful past so that we can learn from it and create a true land of opportunity.
Thank you. And continuing with the agenda summation, we have one set of minutes that require approval this evening from November 16th, 2022. We'll then continue with reports, including reports from council members, an innovation report from the mayor and city offices, reports from council committees, and then our first of two periods of public comment. We'll then take up appointments to boards and commissions, and then move into legislation for second readings and resolutions. Included there, we have Resolution 2315 to review an expenditure of $100,000 or more within a covered fund under Ordinance 1810, additional fiscal oversight by the Common Council regarding expending in excess of $100,000 in street department capital funds for the procurement of a new milling machine. We also have Ordinance 2316 to amend Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Animals, regarding updating and harmonizing chapters 1, 26, 40, 54, and 56 of Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code. We have no legislation for first readings this evening, so we will move into our second of two periods of public comment. We'll then take up matters of council schedule, and then we'll adjourn. So with that, let's move into approval of minutes.
Madam President, I move the approval of the November 16th, 2022 regular session meeting minutes.
Thank you. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. Continuing with reports, beginning with reports from council members. I'll begin on my far right this evening with Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger?
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Sims?
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Rollo?
No report.
Councilmember Sandberg?
Thank you. Just a reminder that the Rollo-Sandberg constituent meeting will be this Saturday, August the 19th, starting at 10, and that Zoom link can be found on the city's website under our council calendar. We urge everyone to come and Zoom in. We have plenty that we can be talking about here before we get to our budget hearing. I would like to say a thank you to the mayor's office for providing a written memo answering questions that I had posed last week. I had hoped to have more of a public opportunity to ask follow-up questions because I certainly have them, but it looks like maybe our next opportunity to do that will be during budget hearings as we consider the fiscal implications of some major expenditures. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith? Plan Commission? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh. Okay.
It has its own section.
I'm sorry? Councilmember Volin?
Is there Never mind.
Well,
Councilmember Smith, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I wasn't sure exactly where we should put this. This is a Plan Commission report from me. I'm the City Council representative for the Plan Commission. The thing that was of note and was important for us all to hear about, public as well as my fellow council members. The Sudbury development slash summit, the summit development. So this was the second part of the first hearing was on Monday. And Travis Venzel and Tyler Ridge came and attended for Sudbury LLC and came and gave us some really good updates. Jackie Scanlon was there present for the city, as well as Michael Rooker and the regular cadre of people. It was the second hearing. We had one a month ago that was continued. That was the first hearing, and then we're going to have another one in September. It's been forwarded by request of the developers. So Mr. Venzel and Mr. Ridge both presented to the Plan Commission and answered questions. Both stated they're still in the development phase, and they're looking forward to hearing more, and they want to hear more, and they want to continue to adjust the project as it evolves in response to people's concerns and issues. Kind of in a nutshell, it's a development of 5 neighborhoods over there in Sudbury, 140 acres, Sudbury Farm. There's going to be 5 different kind of neighborhoods. There's going to be, by accounts at this point, because it's early in the project, 4,450 to 6,000 units with a minimum of 15% affordable housing, which is at 120 of the AMI, the minimum, average minimum income. What that seems to, at least at this early stage, is that's up to 900 units of affordable housing. The way it's going to be developed is kind of in stages. It's a humongous project. There's going to be 15%. This is going to be in each of the 5 areas. So it's not going to be concentrated in one area. It's going to be spread throughout. One of the questions that came up from the commissioners, the plan commissioners, was if there may be a senior living facility in there, and could that be counted as part of the 15% at 120 AMI or below? And I think generally, my thought is that if they're below, if they're Medicaid recipients, and perhaps that is okay. That isn't set in stone. We're still talking about that. The development is going to follow sustainable standards, and it will follow affordable standards. And so they're looking for some incentives to get larger, higher buildings. And so that brought forth some concerns. The concerns of the Plan Commission members, we talked about the mixture of rentals and units that might be, that you could buy. There'll be some single families. There'll be some paired homes. There'll be some apartments. So it's going to be a really, really interesting mix, and it's really going to be an interesting and eventually really a great project. It's a big thing to wrap your head around for all this to get going. The mixture of rentals and purchasable properties, it's really not yet determined exactly. They haven't got that far yet. There was about 20 public members there. One of their big concerns was the Weimer Road capacity for trucks to go down it, for the building to happen. They were worried about that. And evidently there's some flood issues down there too. There's some county and city property issues with the road. And so that was an interesting one that I think is a real challenge for the future. And the developers they're really honest and it's pretty straightforward and said, we haven't got that all figured out yet, but we're in the process of trying to figure this out before they come forward with any kind of final proposal. Neighbors in Arbor Ridge were concerned about the size of the development. I can understand that. It's a really huge development. I will say that the statements made, you know, you can look it up on CATS. It made me feel pretty good about, they were really, Tyler Ridge and Mr. Vinsel were really trying to be considerate about all the environmental issues, about the impacts on neighborhoods. And so if you have concerns about that, you need to please send your input to the Plan Commission folks. You can send it to me as the representative for council or anybody on the Plan Commission. The public was also worried about the environmental impact on the karst topography, some flooding issues, and infrastructure capacity in general, because it's a really big project. The response for all this, you know, concerns and the discussions, you know, it's really undetermined as of yet. They're going to have a traffic study done. They're going to look at the environmental impacts, and those are still to be considered, and it's not yet, you know, finalized. It hasn't got that far because it's such a huge project. So in September, the Plan Commission will have another second hearing, and if it's needed, we will forward it on to a third hearing because the developers and the Plan Commission, and I'm sure this body as well, would like to get it right and try to make it work for everybody because you know, it's an awful lot of people to put in a spot. So there'll be some issues with road access and road development. So thank you. That's my report.
Thank you, and I have no report this evening either. So that takes us to reports from the mayor and city offices. I believe we have Dave Takid with us this evening for an innovation report. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Dave Takid. I'm the Innovation Director for the City of Bloomington, and I'm pleased to present the city's State of Innovation report to you all tonight. A little bit of background. The Office of Innovation was created by the Innovation Task Force convened by Mayor Hamilton in March of 2016 and comprised of folks in city government, local stakeholders, and representatives from City Council. Their mission was to identify what the city could do to improve efficiency, bring in new ideas, and engage residents in new ways. Per the task force's recommendation, the Office of Innovation was created, and its first director, Tom Miller, served until 2018, and I was hired in 2019. Both directors focused on improving internal processes, preparing the organization for the future, and then during my tenure, I've also placed a heavy emphasis on nurturing a culture of innovation. To be clear, innovation did not start when the office was established. However, we didn't have information about what was being done or who was doing it. As part of the effort to nurture a culture of innovation, I began documenting known efforts to understand our starting point, the elements that contribute to innovation happening when it is happening, and to celebrate our innovators. The focus of tonight's presentation will be on how innovation has progressed since the office was established. Specific examples of innovations can be found at the URL you see on the screen, bloomington.in.gov/success. Before discussing our journey of the past 7 years, I want to provide some context about establishing roles like mine in cities around the world. This graph is from an analysis of public innovation by the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center for Public Innovation, and reflects the rate at which municipalities are adding an intentional focus on innovation. The role of innovation director was not invented in Bloomington, Indiana. In fact, when we started our program in late 16, early 17, there were already a dozen or so offices of innovation in the US and more around the world. And as you can see, the trend is rising. And now for some information on our program. With assistance from the IU Data Science program, we tagged and analyzed innovations on the success stories page mentioned earlier from the beginning of this administration through the end of 2022 to understand what types of innovation were occurring and trending over time. Before analyzing the data, if you were to ask me what's the most popular kind of innovation at the city, I would have said hands down software, moving from paper-based processes to digital. But when we look at the data, you can see that there are 3 categories that supersede that. And having that information helps me tell the story of what innovation looks like to our employees and also understand where we have momentum. While this graph looks very similar to the previous one, the data here shows the breakdown of documented innovations by department. This information helps me understand where innovation seems to be happening so that we can understand the components that are contributing to innovation and where it seems to not be happening so we can target those departments and divisions for support and assistance. Also important is who is initiating innovation. Staff make up the bulk of our roughly 530 employees, but currently innovation is being initiated mostly by department directors, as you can see in the gray slice there. To leverage the collective wisdom of the organization, however, the ideal is to have a bottom-up approach where most of the innovation is initiated by the staff, as shown by the light blue slice. In this model, leadership and administration shift away from initiating the innovation to providing guidance and coaching with the innovation director as an internal consultant. So are we improving current processes? 70 projects were documented from 2016 to 2022, 11 of them with the direct involvement of the innovation director. For the projects for which we could calculate a savings, the initial investment is calculated at just under $500,000, and the savings associated with those projects is calculated at under $1.4 million. When we look at recurring costs of those particular projects, their annual cost is at $214,000, and the annual savings are calculated at above $944,000. In addition to the cost savings, these projects produced time savings, allowing employees to focus on higher order tasks, improved morale, improved employee and resident safety, and improved employee and resident engagement. Are we nurturing a culture of innovation? The success stories allow us to acknowledge the innovators on the public-facing website, as well as in our annual celebration to increase the potential that we will get more of what we are focusing on and celebrating. This year's celebration will be in conjunction with the Mills Innovation Week in October, so be sure to be on the lookout for your invitation to that. We've trained almost 24 employees in human-centered design and have at least 2 known spin-off projects by graduates of that training. That's a great indicator that innovation is truly taking root, and just the other day I had a 3rd graduate approach me about a project that they would like to pursue. And as you've seen in the graphs, we have more departments documenting more success stories year over year, but what makes a difference to me is that the departments are approaching me proactively to let me know what they're doing, and also to request training or coaching. Are we more prepared for the future? We applied for and were accepted into the Bloomberg Global Innovation Training Cohort in 2020 and again in 2022. As a result, we've become part of their public innovation network where we can connect directly with other cities about the work that they are doing and not recreate the wheel. I regularly update my colleagues on trends in both emerging issues and solutions for their consideration from this network. Similarly, I participated in the Harvard Government Performance Lab's Community of Practice on alternative responses to 911 calls for service and provided recommendations from their research to the mayor, the deputy mayor, the police chief, the fire chief, and the director of civilian operations for dispatch for their consideration. Preparing for the future includes managing the cadence, communication about, and the impact of change. I spoke about change management at a Parks and Rec retreat when they were preparing for the reality of Switchyard Park. I'm working with ITS on the change management plan as we transition to a digital permitting and licensing platform. And I help the engineering department define their mission and identity and articulate how they relate to planning and public works as a new department. I'm currently working with our ITS department and the vendor IDC on laying the groundwork for preparing a smart city strategic plan for our city, and we hope to involve you in their on-site discussions when they are on-site in October. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but the future of innovation at the city is in your hands and those of the next administration. I'd like to conclude this presentation with some recommendations on how to optimize this role and its impact on the organization. Budget. Surprise, surprise, right? Innovation is currently funded through reversion funds that are appropriated in the spring and do not carry over to the next calendar year. What this means is that the director does not have access to funds for a full quarter of the year. The process, changing this process in future years is highly recommended. It might not happen for 2024, but it's something that should be considered for future years. In 2021, the Innovation Lab at 627 North Morton was open. The space is home to the director's office and a hybrid-capable conference room where all the walls are whiteboards. Maintaining this space helps to provide staff with some physical and mental distance from their normal office environments to think differently. All of the data you've seen here tonight came from success stories that fellows and interns have spent hours documenting. Without their work, we'd have no stories, no data, and no way to celebrate them. A big shout out to two-time innovation intern and soon-to-be innovation fellow, Joe Bergen, who has done the lion's share of this documentation. Funding this kind of support is crucial to furthering a culture of innovation. The bulk of the current and future innovation fund should be to lower the risk for departments to try new things. If the experiment works, great. That becomes a line item in next year's budget. If it fails, no harm, no foul. Reflect on what was learned and try again with innovation as your friend. Integration. By the end of this calendar year, I'll offer department directors an innovation toolkit and the opportunity to apply the tools in a 1.5-day boot camp. Taking the boot camp will be a requirement for receiving future innovation funding. Involving innovation in operations discussions can ensure the continuous improvement and transformation opportunities are considered throughout the year. As well, involvement during annual budget planning can ensure that support, training, and innovation funding opportunities are identified in time to be funded. And finally, radical exploration. These are topics where there are indications that there's a desire for the city to be more bold in exploring processes or new paradigms. Internally, there are aspects of our HR, budget, and procurement processes that could benefit from reinvention. Externally, our latest community survey showed a desire for the city to use new methods to address the issues of affordable housing and homelessness, new and different ways to connect and engage residents in community matters, and new ways to hold true to the policies and ordinances that we already have on the books. And this last one is of particular importance to me because in the sidewalk innovation project of last year, when we connected with residents, many of them did not realize that maintaining the adjacent sidewalk was their responsibility. That concludes this presentation. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to answering any questions you have about the past, the present, or the future of innovation at the city.
Thank you for the presentation. Let's go to council questions. Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you, Ms. Kidd, for the presentation. I'm looking at some of the notes, slides you provided. Is suspension of the leaf service considered an innovation?
Yes, absolutely.
And is that part of the 1.2 I can't remember, 3 million
Yes,
one-time savings?
that's part of both one-time and recurring savings.
And, okay, it's part of both, yes. And approximately how much savings is that for the elimination of the leaf pickup?
Roughly $400,000 per year.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Sims and Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kidd, for the report. Just very quickly, a twofold question. Can you give us an example or discuss what human-centered design is, just so that I'm clear, as well as discuss what are some of the risks that you've encountered for trying new things?
Right.
Okay.
That's a great question. Yeah, so human-centered design, a lot of times when you're improving a process, you're looking at the current state and the ideal state and the gap in between. And a lot of times we can get focused on the allowing the data to drive us and focus on the numbers, the efficiency of a process. In human-centered design, we think about multiple perspectives, and especially the end user of the product or the service, and center them in the conversation and in the problem statement to make sure that the ultimate solution is solving for the people that it's serving. It also brings in those people at the front end to be part of the solution. So instead of solving for, we're solving with. And can you remind me of your second question? What are the risks of trying something new? Yeah, well, failing and wasting a lot of money. You know, I think that that's a big fear, especially in local government, of failing. And so that's why we want to try small things and learn from them and fail fast and fail forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kidd, for your report. The Sidewalk Innovation Team presented to us, I think, in March. And I know there were some projects that you were still working on. Can you talk specifically about the problem of trash and recycle bins blocking sidewalks and whether there's been any new recommendations for that?
That was a recommendation that was, I think, slated for 2025 because there are some complexities associated with it. We documented, I think, 13 different configurations of house relative to sidewalk, relative to driveway, if there was a driveway, and whether it was on-street parking, just a lot of different configurations. And so we said there are other things that we could do faster and less expensively with less disruption first, knowing that we ultimately want to address that because it's still going to be a problem.
Okay. I have another question, but should I wait?
Yeah. Round one. Councilmember Volan?
Presentation. I just wanted to know, can you break down the totals that you mentioned in your presentation? And if not, in a few short words, can we see a breakdown of how you got those total numbers?
I anticipated this question, and given that I just had 10 minutes for the presentation itself, I didn't put them in there, but I'm happy to send them to the council after this.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional round one questions? Councilmember Piedmont Smith, round two.
Yeah, what is the iLab?
The iLab?
Yeah.
So it started really because there wasn't space for me to sit in the office of the mayor physically in that office. So we were looking for new space. And at the bottom of one of the redevelopment commission buildings on North Morton, there was the front of a commercial space available. And so we changed it to the Innovation Lab. It has a large conference area that's hybrid capable with an owl, and almost all of the walls have a whiteboard cling film on them, And it's decorated in a way that it doesn't look governmental, so it gives employees who are using the space some both physical and mental space away from their normal working conditions, and it also gives them the tools to be able to iterate and discuss and track the results from their meetings and their discussions. It also has a keypad, so it doesn't require a badge and it doesn't require a key. It's a keyless entry. So if you've got an after-hours working group and you're looking for a place that doesn't require the complexities of coming to City Hall at night, then you can go there. And it's just up the road, and you can't miss it because Andrew Krebs gave us some beautiful window clings that are blue and aqua and white.
And is that where your office is as well?
That's where my office is as well.
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you.
You additional questions for Ms. Kidd? Okay. Seeing none, I'll just add too that I look forward to getting the slides with additional details on investments and savings as well. So,
definitely.
But thank you so much for your report. Thank you for being with us this evening. Okay. That takes us to reports from council committees. Are there any? Seeing none, that takes us to our first period of public comment. This is for items not on our legislative agenda this evening. May I have a show of hands in chambers of how many people would like to offer public comment? And Mr. Lucas, could you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public joining us via Zoom that would like to speak, please let us know by raising your hand in Zoom. You can do that by clicking on the Reactions tab or the More tab in your control bar. You can also let us know you'd like to speak by sending a chat to the meeting host. I do see 2 hands raised at the moment.
Okay, and I'm not seeing anyone here in chambers. Is that accurate? Okay, let's begin with Zoom then.
First, we have Jim Shelton.
Mr. Shelton, if you would, please confirm your name for the record, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Council. Yes, my name is Jim Shelton. Speaking at the moment on behalf of Court-Appointed Special Advocates, or CASAs, want to say again to the public and you folks that CASA's fall training is coming really soon. It's going to run through September 19th to October 19th. Applications will be done September 8th. So this is a very good opportunity. The training will teach people the roles and responsibilities of a CASA, the family dynamics of abuse and neglect, because there's quite often patterns that are repeated in different situations, about the child protection law in the state of Indiana, and then what kind of reports the court expects the CASA attorney and when they have hearings. So we invite people to consider this. It's a great volunteer opportunity, very satisfying, fun to get to work with children. So invite people to think about that, and I appreciate the opportunity to spread the word.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton.
Is Eric Spoonmore?
Mr. Spoonmore, can you confirm your name for the record, please, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Council. Eric Spoonmore, President and CEO of the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. Can you all hear me okay? Great. So appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. Wanted to give my appreciation to a couple of boards that serve for the city, the Board of Public Works, as well as the Parks Board of Commissioners. I attended both of those meetings over the last couple of days and very much appreciate their support of the policies and resolutions that were before them, unanimous support. And my understanding is the Public Works Board will be referring their recommendation to the council and would urge you to also support that ordinance that would restrict obstructions in the public right-of-way. Although I do want to say that I was deeply troubled. And if you all get the opportunity to watch the meeting that unfolded today in council chambers, some of the inflammatory remarks that were used by folks during public comment. And I really am concerned by the poor decorum and the discourse that unfolded there. And to me, this is a matter of equity and inclusion and accessibility. And if we want all of our members of the public to be participating in civil engagement and working to engage our government, we need to make these welcoming spaces. We cannot allow the most vulgar forms of profanity to be directed towards public officials. We cannot allow threats to be directed towards public officials. You know, I think of families who may want to bring their children to a public meeting, and if they feel like it's not a welcoming space where they will be cursed at, that is a problem. And so I really appreciate Ms. Kidd's, Deb Kidd's remarks about human-centered design, and maybe we could design a process that would disallow such harmful remarks to be cast towards our public officials and other members of the community who simply want to engage with their government. So I'll just leave that there. Again, appreciate all the work that you all do. Thank you so much, and urge your support of the Public Works ordinance that will be coming your way shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Spoonmore. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone else?
No, not that I see.
And I'm not seeing anyone in chambers, just to check once more. Okay, that'll conclude our first of two periods of public comment. That takes us to appointments to, appointments to boards and commissions. So do we have anything from Team A, Team B, Team C, and I believe we have an appointment from a special committee? Okay. Councilmember Sandberg.
Madam President, if I may, the interview team of Councilmember Smith and Scambolari and myself had the opportunity to read 9 very excellent applications to our Capital Improvement Board, and we spent 3 days last week interviewing 6 very capable candidates, and we are pleased this evening to be able to offer our nomination for seat C1, Doug Bruce, for the CIB.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Any other appointments to boards and commissions? Okay. Seeing none, that takes us to legislation for second readings and resolutions.
Madam President, I move that Resolution 2315 be introduced and read by the clerk by title synopsis only.
Second.
All those in favor of the motion to introduce indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk, if you would, please.
Resolution 2315, to review an expenditure of $100,000 or more within a covered fund under Ordinance 1810, additional fiscal oversight by the Common Council regarding expending in excess of $100,000 in Street Department capital funds for the procurement of a new milling machine. The synopsis is as follows. This resolution is submitted in accordance with Ordinance 1810, additional fiscal oversight by the Common Council, and requests the Council authorize the net expenditure of $300,000 by the Street Department to replace the department's current milling machine, which is no longer functional. Said $300,000 was not previously identified for the Council, as the procurement was only determined to be necessary during the last few weeks.
Thank you. So I believe, oh, sorry.
I move that Resolution 2315 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. I believe we have Mr. Van Deventer with us this evening, and I believe we have Mr. Rooker on Zoom. Is that accurate, Mr. Lucas?
Mr. Rooker may be joining us momentarily. I believe Mr. Van Deventer will be kicking things off.
Joe Van Deventer, Director of Street Operations. I'll be glad to answer any questions you guys or you folks have about this. It was kind of an unforeseen thing. Our fleet maintenance found a major problem in our milling machine around March. The parts that we need were in Germany, and it was almost July for the parts for ours came in, and then our fleet department realized they weren't capable of repairing it. So we started renting this current machine that we're wanting to buy in May, and it's kept our operation going.
Okay. Thank you. And is there anything from Mr. Rooker, or?
I don't see Mr. Rooker on the meeting. If members need additional background as to why this request is coming to council, I know this is not something you're used to seeing. I'm happy to provide background. I covered it in the memo that was included in your packet, but if there are questions, I'm happy to get into that.
Okay.
We had this money in our budget for 2 triaxles, but we're not wanting to spend it on that. So that was we're not spending it on what we told you we would spend it on. So I believe that's why we wanted to come.
And so here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
Okay. So, Mr. Lucas, do you have any other context you want to provide for the benefit of the public? Or?
That's a short story. This is a requirement that the council put in place in 2018. I think you've only had a couple of these requests come to you for review. This one is for a capital expenditure that wasn't in a previously approved plan, over $100,000. So.
Great. Thank you. Questions from council? Councilmember Sandberg?
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Van Deventer. We certainly appreciate your work as Director of Streets. If you would, for the public and for us, kind of describe a little bit what that milling machine does. I know it's critical in keeping our streets clear and safe.
It allows us we usually do what they call a mill and fill. We'll take 1.5 inches off and put 1.5 inches back. That way we don't lose our curb heights. The driveway approaches stay the same height. And we turn around and sell that to E&B for $6 a ton, so that helps us in the long run also.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith and Councilmember Sims?
Yes, I wanted to review where the funds are coming from. So it was supposed to go towards a truck. Will then that truck be purchased next year, or?
We're hoping for maybe to get some of that back with the end of year stuff. We didn't, as everybody knows, we didn't have much of a winter, so we do have quite a bit of salt money left. So that's kind of what we're thinking. Yeah. Maybe we can get some of that back with the end of year stuff.
As I imagine you need the truck too.
We do.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Sims?
Thank you for the report, Mr. Van Deventer.
Thank you.
And thank you, Councilmember Piedmont Smith, for asking that question. That's just what I was going to ask, one of them. But you stated earlier that you all are renting the machine that you want to buy.
Correct.
So is this a rent to own?
Right now.
Or are you just using it, then you're going to buy something brand new?
Right now, the rent that we're paying is going off this price every month. It is basically a rent to own, but if we get this money, we will buy it outright.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo?
Thank you. What's the longevity of this milling machine? How long does it last?
I think if taken care of, I think 12 years maybe.
Thank you.
It has very low hours on it right now.
That's it. That's it. Any additional questions? Okay. Seeing none, let's go to the public for comment. If you have comments on Resolution 2315, please approach the podium at this time. Mr. Lucas, could you please extend our invitation on Zoom?
Yes. Yeah, members joining us via Zoom would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. You can do that by clicking on the Reactions tab or the More tab in your control bar. You can also let us know you'd like to speak by sending the meeting host a chat.
And Mr. Lucas, are you seeing anyone?
I do not know.
Okay, and I'm not seeing any here in chambers, so let's come back to council. Any additional questions or final comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Resolution 2315?
Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Scambaluri?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
And Volin?
Yes.
Thank you.
Passes 9-0. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Van Buren.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2316 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
All those in favor of the motion to introduce, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Madam Clerk, will you please read?
Ordinance 2316 to amend Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Animals regarding updating and harmonizing chapters 01, 26, 40, 54, and 56 of Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance makes several changes to Title VII of the Bloomington Municipal Code to reflect current and best practices, update the dangerous animal definitions, add a deer feeding ban, increase the amount of certain fees, and add additional time to the appeals process.
Thank you.
Madam President, I move that ordinance 2316 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. And I believe we have Mr. Sauter with us. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Virgil Sauter. I'm the Director of Animal Care and Control. I'm here on behalf of the city's Animal Control Commission, which worked on these ordinance updates over the past year and just passed them June 12th of this year. So they're recommending and to bring it here for your consideration and approval. I'll go over some of the big sections of the updates and kind of some of the thoughts behind it. The first major changes that are proposed are to our dangerous animal ordinances. These proposals were actually put together by a joint task force with the City Animal Control Commission and Monroe County Animal Management Commission. And the Monroe County has passed this section of the updates, the dangerous animals, into their code as well. The changes look at simplifying our dangerous levels from what used to be 4 down to 3. We utilized Ian Dunbar's BITE classifications for the definitions of these ordinances. These are accepted classifications by both behaviorists and dog trainers. As you go up in the level, the likelihood of another bite occurring that is as severe or more severe increases, as well as the probability of the animal being able to be worked with successfully and controlled from having a bite also decreases. So we can go to the next slide. So here we see the different levels. So potentially dangerous, that first grouping are animals, basically animals that have bitten with injuries that are concerns but not necessarily severe to people. And then the dangerous and the vicious dogs are more severe injuries. When hearing a case, the animal control officers will use those definitions in conjunction with the reports from the animal control officers, witnesses, and owners in making their decisions. The other piece that we added is both the city commissions and the county commissions have struggled over the years with the previous ordinance when it came to animal-on-animal injuries, specifically looking at a dog killing a chicken being the same as a dog giving severe injury or killing another dog. The changes give, depending on the situation, the ability to define an animal as either being potentially dangerous or dangerous, depending on those situations. The requirements for declaring the animals, in addition to proper containment and leash handling at all levels that we've had before, we have started our microchipping at the lowest level to allow for proper identification of those animals and as they transfer between both city and county movement or into or out of the county. If declared dangerous or vicious, the animal is required to wear a muzzle when off property as well. All right. The next section of the ordinance is the addition of a deer feeding ban. This deer feeding ban looks to address one of the sources of human-deer conflicts, while also looking out for the health and welfare of the deer. When deer are fed, they tend to congregate in larger numbers in areas where this artificial feeding occurs. Where there are larger groups of deer, there's actually an increased risk of disease spread between those deer. And also the feed is not a part of their natural diet, which can cause health concerns for the deer. So the feeding ban, one, looks at providing an opportunity to deal with our conflict that people have with the deer and address some of those concerns while also protecting our natural resource of the deer in Bloomington. I will say when we looked at language for the deer feeding ban, we relied heavily on the work of the Deer Task Force. The language that they proposed back in, I believe, if I have my 2012, we couldn't outdo much, so we did borrow heavily from that ordinance with the recommendations here. So specifically what constitutes feeding is any food on the ground or low structure under 5 feet, and we have a list of what constitutes that type of food as well. It does exempt any activities by authorized individuals for the sake of, if need to trap, relocate with DNR or animal control activities. Also exempts bird feeders and any gardening or raising of crops. That includes orchards, fruit trees. I will say that if you are having conflict with deer or any wildlife, all wildlife are attracted to bird feeders. So that's one of the first things that you should, even though this ban doesn't include those, you should consider removing, as well as down fruit from fruit trees. I have received some questions about enforcement of this ordinance. We will enforce this ordinance based on reports of feeding stations, as we do many of our ordinances, as well as this will be part of the training for animal control officers when investigating any kind of deer conflict to kind of do an assessment of the area to see if this is part of that larger conflict. Last, another major change is looking at some of the fee changes. I'm always a little bit hesitant to raise fees when it comes to animals. A lot of what we deal with are people on lower social economic scales, so larger fees tend to impact them greatly. However, there are a few fees we thought made sense in these changes. One is the small increase for animals surrendered from out-of-county sources. This is basically a $10 increase over all the levels from the previous fees. It is very minor. It doesn't 100% cover our costs, but our concern is always that because we are a very animal-friendly location and have a very successful shelter, we don't want to prevent animals from coming to the shelter just because of the fee. The other thing we looked at is increasing our adoption fees. Our adoption fees haven't been increased since our last ordinance. Those fees currently were based on costs that the shelter incurs for spay neuter surgeries, microchipping of the animals, basic vaccinations. Those costs for our shelter have gone up exponentially, and so this not to exceed fee looks at recouping that cost. And the reason we're asking for a not to exceed fee on this is there are definitely some animals that we can get away with or can expect people to be able to pay more and willing to pay more. So think of puppies, which we don't get in as much as we used to, or small breed dogs. These are animals that we can move out of the shelter quickly. We can recoup some of those costs, whereas our young, exuberant, large breed dogs or our cats we still struggle with, so we would want to keep those costs lower. I will continue to work with the Animal Control Commission on evaluating those fees on a basis and deciding changes as they need to be. And then we also added monitoring fee for both dangerous and vicious, with vicious being more, vicious again being more highly dangerous animals in our community. All right, and then the last, one of the last major additions is for a habitual offender cause. In preparing this presentation, I almost moved this up to our potentially dangerous animals, because they do go hand in hand. I think of this as our the one animal ordinance that deals with the people more so than the animals in some ways. And the Animal Control Commission has always been kind of hesitant to take animals away from people unless the situation really, really warrants it, which, and then fines often don't solve the problems. So we wanted to add another option of what can be done that might cause change. And so we're adding a responsible pet owner class. That responsible pet owner class will be conducted at the shelter with shelter staff and animal control officers, and we hope to expand initially in that way, and we hope to expand using some of our partners in the community, such as the Monroe County Humane Association, to broaden what that class can be. Thank you all for considering these changes, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Volan, and then Rollo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Souter, for the presentation. Could we have the slides back up? I wanted to go back to the new fees slide. I first of all, didn't hear what the fees were, and if they weren't on the slide, what is the increase in adoption fees from?
So the increased adoption fees, currently our adoption fees for cats and dogs are divided by age. So cats and dogs 5 years and up are currently $55, under 5 years of age are $75. And then our rabbits are $45.
So it's a substantial increase,
it's a
reflecting
substantial increase, yes.
So the world we live in now.
Exactly, yeah. And that's why we added that not to exceed clause, because we don't want to make a huge jump either.
Well, the other question is the monitoring. What do those costs reflect, and how can you monitor a dangerous or vicious animal for that little amount of money? What does that mean?
That's just it's kind of a token cost to kind of cover some of what the animal control officers are doing. When an animal has been declared, the animal control officers evaluate any structures that are used to house those animals. They periodically inspect the properties, make sure the proper signs as far as a dangerous or vicious animal is up and seen, that the enclosures that kids can't just wander into. So it's both making sure that they are up and then also just doing routine visits to make sure that everything is in good repair.
Just out of curiosity, are the requirements, well, first I want to know who exactly declares an animal dangerous or vicious? Excellent.
Thank you. I realized I ran right over that part of my presentation, so thank you for asking that question. The Animal Control Commission is the body that declares the animal potentially dangerous, or vicious. We, as the Animal Control, Care and Control Division, we bring the animals that we think fit that to their attention, and then they make the determination.
Okay, but just the last question would be, well, I remember when we had the chicken ordinance, and we required coops built out of brick. And it seems to me that we actually, maybe it's not true anymore, but that we required more out of keeping chickens away from people than from keeping vicious animals at bay. Is that possible that that's true?
It's an interesting question.
I love asking stumpers.
I would not say that that is true. Okay. Again, and that's part of the officer's determination to go in. I will say when it comes to the dangerous and potentially dangerous animals in the city, that primarily what we see are those potentially dangerous, those smaller bites, those not severe instances. The dangerous and the vicious determinations are much more rare.
Is there an avenue of appeal for somebody who opposes a declaration of a dog, for example, as vicious?
Yes, so like I said, the determination happens at the Animal Control Commission's meeting. The owner of those animals are invited to attend, and they can present their case of why that should not happen. If the commission hears that those animals should be declared and make that determination, that can be appealed in the civil court system, and that's the other change that happens. In our current ordinance, there was a limit of, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, I believe it was 10 days. To make that appeal, that has changed to 60. So.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rallo.
Thank you, Director Souter. I have two questions. The first is, those animals that are surrendered from outside Monroe County, are they derived mostly from individuals, or do they also come from other county shelters?
The ones we are currently taking are from individuals. In the past, when we had need for, say, puppies to get people into our shelter, just as a draw, we would take some in from out of county. We haven't done that for years because our numbers are so high and we don't have the room. So the ones we are taking in are solely from citizens from other areas. Okay,
great. So I'm glad to hear that the Deer Task Force report is still relevant. But my question, and I support this feeding ban. One aspect of the report that isn't relevant anymore because it's been elaborated on and described further by the Ball State study is that urban deer are really different in terms of behavior than deer outside of the city. That is, they stay put. And so it's almost like an island. At least the females and their daughters stay put. And so it gives a potential for control of those animals' population. And you know, we concluded that a lethal approach was in the city was probably impractical for a variety of reasons. So there is a potential for non-lethal control of the population. But first of all, what we need to do is count them. It seems that we need then to derive, and I was originally opposed to counting because it didn't seem to be relevant because they were migrating in and out. But this shows, the Ball State study shows that essentially that there is an urban population. So, you know, the reducing deer density results in a dramatic drop of tick density, and ticks spread disease. So my question is, next steps. Are we going to now proceed to at least get a handle on the number in the city so we can have an idea of the relative density and the potential danger posed by tick-borne diseases?
So as far as looking at deer counts and deer numbers, I do agree if it's the will of the city and this council to reduce the number of deer, that a deer count is the first place we need to go. But again, I struggle to do a count if we don't know exactly why we're doing the count. So I agree if the goal is to reduce the numbers, the deer count is the first place to go. When it comes to tick-borne diseases, the studies that I have read and been exposed to, reduce in deer population does not necessarily coincide with reduce in tick population. And that is something that tick populations and tick-borne diseases is something that is being monitored by the Monroe County Health Department.
Okay, I guess we differ. I'll send some links to papers that indicate the opposite. Thanks.
And I'm happy, I'd be more than happy to hear those.
Is that it? Thank you. Councilmember Sims and Councilmember Piedmont-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Souter. First thing I just want to say is that you mentioned a token cost with regard to monitoring dangerous and vicious animals. Mm-hmm. And I just really hate that term when we're talking about, in particular, tax dollars and money that's spent, token anything. So I guess my only question there is, do you estimate that the actual cost is higher or lower or about right?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The actual cost, just based on salary of the animal control officer and the amount of time needed to do the checks, the actual cost is higher than that.
Okay. And if a dog in particular needs microchipped, how is that handled? Is that something that your office does? Or do we send them to a vet? Or what's about the approximate cost to the animal's owner to have it microchipped?
Yeah, and so with the microchip, the cost does vary a bit depending on where it's done. It is something that any vet in the town can do. It is something that the animal shelter does. Monroe County Humane Association also does it, and Bloomington Pets Alive does it as well. Last checked, both the shelter, Bloomington Pets Alive, and Monroe County Humane Association, we all had the same cost, was just $15. I will use this time to say, if anybody with pets out there, microchip is a wonderful thing. It helps us greatly if that animal gets out to get it home as soon as possible. So I would definitely plug those microchips, not just for dangerous dogs.
No, I totally agree with you. Except for in this particular case, the board would be requiring someone to get their animal chipped.
Correct.
So that's kind of what, so we agree.
Yeah.
And lastly, for the removal of animals, do we have to go to court for that, or how is that handled? Do we just say you violated ordinance, here comes law enforcement, and we take, I mean, how does that happen?
That's an excellent question. Our first cases, we do take the determination to the owner. If there are any hesitancy in turning them over, at that point, normally we would have to get a warrant to go in and seize the animal. Often at this stage, because of what's happened, the amount of fines and fees that have gone, often owners work with us, but if not, we would have to go that route.
Thank you. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Souter, for your presentation. You said that the cost for adoption fees has not increased since the last ordinance. When was the last ordinance? So how long has it been since the fees increased?
That is an excellent question. I do not have the exact date. I think it was it was around 2010, 2012.
Okay.
Somewhere, it was prior to me becoming the director, so it's been over 8 years.
Okay. And you think at least 10 years ago?
Yeah.
So it's been a while.
It's been a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Hi, thank you. So my question is about bird feeders being exempt. Is anything under 5 feet considered potentially not a bird feeder? I just know some people feed birds on the ground, and so, but that is what deer are eating, I guess.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's one that we'll have to kind of look at. It's the language of the ordinance, if kind of with the activity of feeding deer prohibits it, but we would definitely, because of the conflict, and if there is a conflict, we'd want to work with that homeowner to change it. So it might not be something that we would cite, but it would be something we definitely want to pursue to work with.
Sorry, just for clarification, you're saying if someone is feeding birds on the ground, it does not violate the ordinance?
That's an excellent question. I'm looking at the ordinance right now just to double check that my reading is correct. So with the language that's presenting, bird feed on the ground is excluded from what's considered food for deer. So if it's bird feed on the ground, that would not be considered feeding the deer.
Is that because deer don't eat bird seed? Or I guess I
No.
think that is pretty problematic if anyone is still allowed to feed birds on the ground.
Yeah, no, I hear that. The concern is having a, because of the long-term practice of feeding birds and how ingrained that is, we were attempting to kind of keep allowing that to happen. I can definitely see that problematic, and it's something that we definitely would need to have a discussion about.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Additional questions? Okay. Oh, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you for the report. Appreciate it. Looks like these changes are really great. Here's my question for tonight is in your discussion, about animals and animal care and control in Bloomington, have you discussed like dogs that continuously bark for hours and hours, and how, if there's, where's the, what might be the place of animal care and control in Bloomington? How does that fit in? And yeah.
Yeah, so there is in Title VII, there is public nuisance ordinance, and under that public nuisance ordinance, barking is included. So it is something that my office does investigate regularly and work with people to stop. It is something that's, I will say it is something that's very hard to enforce and follow up, because it does take the person making the complaint to bring a lot of evidence forward, because the short time that my officers get there, we don't always witness what's going on. So we have to kind of work through, and sometimes it does take a while to kind of build a case and make change. But if we do get the complaint, we always talk to the owner of the dogs and start that conversation immediately.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I appreciate the changes.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Okay. Seeing none, let's go to public comment. If you have comments to offer on Ordinance 2316, please go ahead and approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, could you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if there are members of the public that wish to speak to this item, please let us know by raising your hand in Zoom, which you can do by clicking on the Reactions tab or the More tab. You can also send a chat to the meeting host to let us know you'd like to speak.
Okay. Did you have comments? Please go ahead and approach the podium. Yeah. Mr. Lucas, are you seeing anyone on Zoom? Okay. Welcome. If you would, please state your name for the record, and then you'll see a timer on screen. You'll have 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Julie Gray, and I'm a Bloomington resident and a huge admirer of our animal shelter and Virgil Souter. And I have actually been here before this council talking about deer. So I wanted to come tonight to say hooray to the city for proposing this prohibition on deer feeding. I think you may know the saying that fed wildlife are dead wildlife. It's never a good idea to feed wildlife, for all the reasons Mr. Souter mentioned. So I've worked with a large number of animal advocates here in the city on the deer issue and on other animal issues. And so I felt that we want to come here and say thank you for doing this. I also just wanted to use the chance to reiterate that there is a large group of us who are very eager to work with the city on the deer population question. And I think since the last discussion about the deer kills at Griffey, the city has seen that the kills are costly and ineffective. And since that time, there's been a huge number of cities and a great mass of scientific evidence that indicates that fertility control is much more effective at reducing the population once and for all, and the problem gets eliminated. So if the discussion comes up again, the animal advocates and I would love to talk about it and reconsider the way. But this is a great evidence, this measure here, of the city caring for humans and wildlife and how they interact. And we really thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Mr. Lucas, do we have anyone on Zoom?
No, not that I see.
Okay, and is there anyone else here in chambers who would like to offer comment? Okay, seeing none, let's come back to council for additional questions. Seeing none, is there any final comments? Are there any final comments? Councilmember Rosenbarger, then Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Thank you for this. I am in support of it. I would potentially like to see maybe in a year from now, like what updates we need to make, if any, on this for animals eating on the ground. Thanks.
Thanks. Councilmember Piedmont Smith, and then Councilmember Rollo.
Yes, I just want to thank the Animal Care and Control Commission and Mr. Souter and his staff for their work on this. I think it's great that we are taking the very small step of banning the feeding of deer. I would still recommend, if anybody has neighbors who feed their deer, to just go talk with your neighbors instead of calling Animal Care Control directly first. Try just the neighborly approach, and if that doesn't work, then Animal Care and Control can help. But I just talked to my neighbors today, as a matter of fact, who put out corn for the deer, and I said, we're going to be voting on this, and I think it's probably going to pass. So they were very nice about it and said, oh, we didn't mean to cause any problems. So they have a lot of critters other than birds that eat at their bird feeders, but that's another issue. So thank you, everybody, for your work on this. I will be voting yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Rollo.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the fee structure increases in the feeding ban on deer. As I said, I think that I differ with Director Souter's conclusion about deer density and tick-borne diseases. I just sent a paper from PubMed to Mr. Souter and to all of us, and I have several more. I think the confusion may lie in that deer are not directly responsible for the propagation of the parasite, the Borrelia parasite, which causes Lyme disease. That is from rodents and birds, which are the transmission hosts. But deer will increase the prevalence of ticks, and so increases the probability, according to the paper I'm looking at here, in the journal Parasitic Vectors, increases Lyme disease hazard by 5-fold in high deer density plots due to tick density being 18 times higher. So I think it's important for public health to monitor the number of deer. The indications are if deer are no more than 5 per square kilometer, the hazard of Lyme disease is significantly reduced, but we won't know that unless we have an idea of the deer density. And so I think the first thing that we need to do is count the deer, and we can do that cheaply now with drones. I found myself on the opposite side of this topic with Ms. Gray some years ago. I would say that my questions to Parks and Rec indicate that the deer calligraphy is working, that it has reduced browsing pressure on the understory. There is a legacy effect because we took so long to reduce the deer density there. So there are areas which won't recover because they've been overbrowsed for such a long time. But I do find myself in agreement with Ms. Gray that Bloomington now is demonstrated by the Ball State study as having the potential for non-lethal approaches in the city, which I think would please most people in order to address the deer density problem, if we have that. But the first step is to count them, and I hope that we move forward on that soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Everyone's pointing at each other. Wait.
I actually have an amendment.
Oh, yes. Go
I
ahead.
almost forgot. I have an amendment. Madam Chair, I move Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2316. This amendment is just a matter of using inclusive language. I noticed some of the ordinance uses he, she, and him, her language, whereas using the pronoun they, their is more inclusive. And I think that the city, at every opportunity to change language in our code to make it more inclusive, should do so. So that's what this amendment does. So it would just be the chapters that are part of the changes that have been brought forward. In those chapters, there would be a change wherever it says he, she, or him, her, it would change to they, their. So that's the extent of it.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councilmember Piedmont Smith? Seeing none, let's go to public comment on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2316. Is there any comment here in chambers? If you would, please approach the podium. Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom, please?
Yes, if members of the public wish to speak to this amendment, please let us know by raising your hand in Zoom.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone here in chambers.
No takers on Zoom.
Okay, let's come back to council then. Are there any additional questions or final comment on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2316? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Amendment 1 to Ordinance 2316?
Yes. Councilmember Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Sims?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Scambaluri?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Boland?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
That amendment passes 9-0. Thank you. So that brings us back to Ordinance 2316 as amended. Was there any additional comment? I don't think there was. Okay. In which case, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Ordinance 2316? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
Yeah, I do have a comment after all.
Oh, sorry. Councilmember Sims, Councilmember Boland then.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Mr. Souter. I still maintain that uncontrolled deer is a public health hazard as well as a deer management hazard or problem. And I will maintain that. And there is conflicting data. And I get all that. I mean, we've got academians and we read reports and we do all this. But I've mentioned this before, so I don't think there's any HIPAA violations. But I was one of those people who innocently got bit by a tick and got Lyme disease. Caught it early, took medication, and it's okay as far as I know. Maybe later in life it'll be different, but it's okay. But from a public health standpoint, we need to reduce the prevalence of that opportunity. I understand that if I'm out on the golf course and I'm looking 100 yards ahead or off to the side and there's a family of deer, I have introduced myself into that. So I understand it. If I go over where they are and do different things, then I know I increase any particular tick that they may have to be a part of me. So I tend to avoid, and if I hit a ball there, I don't, bend down that road, don't want to do that again. But that's totally different than driving down 7th and Elm by the Banneker Center, and deer are coming over the fence while people are slowing down to stop and creating that type of hazard as well. So I understand what you said, and I'm not so sure you need a mandate from the city or city council to say our goal is to reduce deer population. I think that should be something we work toward, but I also think we need to know where they are, What are their migrating patterns in order to begin that conversation? I think you kind of got the cart before the horse, or if I got that wrong, vice versa. So I think it's important to get those deer counts, where they're migrating to, and do what we can to control wildlife as far as their interaction with humans and cars and neighborhoods and animals and dogs and that sort of thing. So just keep that in mind, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Volin.
Yes, thank you. I'm in favor of adjusting fees accordingly to target the, I mean, this is another case that's sort of like sanitation, like the, if we're not increasing these fees, then the burden goes on people who, taxpayers who basically are subsidizing other people having pets. And, you know, I don't object to pets at all. I just feel like they should bear the costs. But I really wanted to call attention to, I mean, in listening to both Mr. Souter and Ms. Gray talking tonight, I Googled the word wildlife on the city website and came across the page bloomington.gov/animal-shelter/assistance/wildlife. And I feel like it would be in order for the Animal Control Division to mount some kind of a campaign to promote what was said tonight about not feeding the wildlife. Don't feed the bears, don't feed the deer, don't encourage the feeding of wildlife. The page as it is now is just sort of a don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it doesn't really explain why. And I think that the two of them speaking tonight really gave good explanation of why, and that if there was more of a minor campaign targeted to educating people as to why it's bad to feed wildlife, it would allow the rest of us to point to that page and say, here's why, not just don't do this. But like maybe a special page, maybe with a logo or an image, just something that resembles the barest of PR campaigns. Because I think it's overdue that we find a way to finally say decisively, no, it's not right to feed the wildlife. I think a lot of people don't understand that. I mean, I read in my social media feeds all the time about people fond of the deer, for example, that they see in their yards. And I remember also a very dramatic testimony we had at this podium from a citizen whose child was charged by a deer, whose dog was charged by a deer. That, you know, I mean, we have both sides of it, but in the end, it's not doing the deer or the wildlife any good to feed them. That's just not clear here. And for those people who are, you know, animal rights woke, you might say, you know, there really ought to be more of the why on this page, if not a separate page that's just encouraging people or explaining to people why this is the right policy. So having said that, I'm very supportive of the ordinance, and I'm very glad that after many, many, many years of debate over deer, Councilmember Rallo can certainly attest to how long we've been talking about it. 15 years, is it? At least 15 years?
Well, it was 2012. The report was concluded, so 11.
Yeah. But anyway, this is a good resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on Ordinance 2316 as amended?
Councilmember Sims?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Scambalori?
Yes.
Rallo?
Yes.
Sandberg?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Volin?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
And Rosenbarger?
Yes.
That passes 9-0. Thank you. We have no legislation for first reading this evening, so that takes us to our second of two periods of public comment. If I could, I'd like to see a show of hands in chambers of who would like to offer comment. And Mr. Lucas, can you extend our invitation on Zoom?
Yes, if members of the public wish to speak, please let us know by using the raise hand feature under your control bar, by clicking the reactions tab or the more tab. You can also send a chat to the host to let us know you'd like to comment.
Okay. I'm not seeing any requests here in chambers. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. In which case, let's come back and take up matters of council schedule.
Yes, thank you. Just one reminder, the council does not have a scheduled meeting next Wednesday. Your next scheduled meeting is Monday, August 28th. That's the beginning of the departmental budget hearings. This year, we've scheduled those meetings to begin at 5:30 p.m. That's a slight change from past practice. I believe in the past we've started at 6, so please remember that new time. Those will be 4 nights that week, the 28th through the 31st, and budget books are scheduled to be released by the end of next week from the Controller's Office. So we'll look forward to beginning budget discussions soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for the good of the order this evening? Seeing nothing, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.